Despite having excellent technical skills, the company I work for was suddenly pushed into a crisis due to the bankruptcy of our client, which accounted for 90% of our sales. "Are we gonna go bankrupt over $2 million?" I stopped the CEO, who sighed and muttered that. "Will $2 million be enough by the end of this week? I owe this company a lot for taking me in." My coworkers all turned to listen to my plan. "My name is John Smith. I'm 52 years old, and I left a major trading company 3 years ago to work at a small metal processing plant in the countryside. There was a reason I quit the trading company where I had worked for a long time since being hired as a new graduate. To put it simply, I was forced to resign. The company I used to work for was a major trading company that mainly dealt with agricultural machinery. Each piece of agricultural machinery is very expensive. They must be transported with the utmost care during delivery. Of course, I always handled and delivered the equipment with care. However, one day, we received a report from a client that the delivered equipment had a serious defect, causing a temporary uproar in the company. The defect was not due to a design flaw. It was clearly damage that occurred either before or during transportation. It wasn't just a scratch, the engine was damaged, and it almost caused a fire, endangering the employees. The negotiation for that product was handled by Mike and me. I was responsible only for the transportation to the client's site. Since it involved a large truck, I, who had a license for large vehicles, often handled the deliveries. Mike did the final inspection and loading of the truck. When I did the final inspection, there wasn't a single scratch. It probably got damaged during transport. Maybe it tipped over or something. I couldn't believe my ears. The way he said it made it sound like I had damaged the product and delivered it to the client while hiding it. I desperately refuted. At this point, there's no evidence. However, Mike suggested, "How about we check the inside of the truck? If there's any damage, it could prove that something happened during transport." We decided to inspect the truck used for the delivery. There was a clear dent on the inside, as if something heavy had collided with it. Of course, there was no such dent during transport. Mike looked at the dent with a shocked expression and said, "Delivering something that might be defective, it could lead to a major accident." I was severely questioned and blamed by the higher upas and eventually forced to resign. Leaving the company I had poured my heart and soul into for so many years in such an undesired manner was devastating, to say the least. I was in my late 40s, serving as a department manager at the time. It was tough, not just for me, but also for my wife, Emily, who had to face this injustice. Emily and I met while she was working as an office clerk at the same company. We got married when my career was on track and decided together that she would focus on household chores. We didn't have children, but we lived together, supporting each other since then. Emily understood my job and its intricacies. That's why it was so important to me that she believed in me, but she didn't. Emily and I had numerous arguments, and eventually she left the house. She realized that without a job, our savings and my modest severance wouldn't be enough to live on. Shortly after she left, I received a completed divorce form. I tried calling her countless times to discuss it, but she never answered, leaving me no choice but to sign the divorce papers. About a month after losing my job and having the divorce finalized, one day, living a listless life, one day I received an envelope. The sender was none other than Mike. Puzzled, I opened the envelope to find several photos inside. As I pulled out one of the photos, I was left speechless. What is this? The photo showed a man and a woman, arm in arm, smiling happily. The man was Mike, and the woman was my ex-wife. My hand holding the photo trembled uncontrollably. Moreover, my ex-wife was wearing a pure white wedding dress. Realizing they had gotten married less than a month after our divorce was finalized, I was certain my wife had been unfaithful. At that moment, I also realized the extent of Mike's deception. He must have tampered with the truck, and then suggested, "How about we check the truck?" to frame me. I immediately called Mike. As soon as the call connected, I demanded, "Hey, what's the meaning of these photos?" Well, what you see is what you get. We got married. I don't understand. Were you involved with my wife all along? It's your fault for neglecting your wife, John. Don't mess with me. I'll sue for damages. Mike mocked my anger. Do you have any evidence? I bet you didn't even record this call, did you? He was right. I clenched my teeth in frustration. People believe that you messed up at work, lost your job, and Emily left you because of that. Then she met me, we hit it off, and got married quickly. That's the truth everyone knows. Laughing scornfully, Mike said this and hung up before I could respond. I slumped down. I couldn't stand up for a while. Mike had likely planned everything to create a believable story for their remarriage. I had been framed for a major mistake at work, forced to resign. And then Mike comforted my disillusioned ex-wife, leading to their marriage. Since everyone already saw me as the bad guy, their quick remarriage was more easily accepted by the public despite some initial gossip. For the first time, I wanted to disappear. I had lost my job and my wife of many years. No, I had lost her long before. At rock bottom, I grew tired of fighting against the flow of salaried workers rushing to their offices every day and dragging myself to the employment office. I wanted to escape. That's when the idea of moving to the countryside struck me. Having been born and raised in the busy cities of the East Coast, the countryside seemed incredibly appealing. Although I had never been interested when I was younger, now I longed for a life surrounded by rice fields, seeing large red tractors working in the green fields in spring and looking at bountiful rice crops in autumn. I genuinely felt that way. I was born in the East Coast and had worked for many years in the West Coast, so I decided to move to the Midwest, the opposite side of the country. I found a job at a small metalworking company there. 90% of the metal parts they produced were used in agricultural machinery. That was the deciding factor, and I sent in my resumes to the company. Things moved surprisingly smoothly, and I was hired the same day I went for the interview. I wore a suit, but the CO, coming straight from the factory, sat in front of me in his work clothes. The office attached to the factory had no reception room or meeting rooms, just a corner with two large sofas facing each other across a table, separated by partitions. John, I see you used to work at a big company. That's impressive. Why did you quit? Well, there was a bit of trouble. I hesitated, unsure how to answer, and ended up being vague. But to my surprise, the CO laughed heartily. Well, there's a lot going on in the city. If you're okay with working here, you're welcome. We're short-staffed right now. When can you start? That's how the conversation went. Normally, if someone hears that you quit because of trouble, they'd be suspicious and want to dig deeper. But the CO just brushed it off with, "The city has its issues," and decided to hire me without further questions. Surprised by the casualness of the countryside, I started my second career. The craftsmen were all kind to me. At first, they were cautious knowing I was from the East Coast, but as they saw my sincere work ethic, they gradually softened their attitudes. I, in turn, was initially confused by the closeness of people, something I hadn't experienced in the city, but I found it comforting. For example, "John, do you have a wife?" "No, I'm divorced." When an older employee asked me this, I braced myself for the personal question, but answered honestly. To my surprise, the employee burst out laughing. "Your wife left you? Mine did too." It was refreshing to see such a response. When they realized I wasn't a stuck-up elite, our relationships grew closer, and we started going out for drinks once a month. These encounters in the countryside began to change my passive outlook. People laughed off my embarrassing divorce as something common and rarely asked about my previous company. In a good way, people here didn't care much about career or titles. Instead, they talked excitedly about the weather, delicious food, and their kids or grandkids. Yesterday, my grandma picked some wild vegetables. "It's the first of the season. I'll give you some," they would say, and I'd receive the vegetables, and my son hurt his back. "Can you help with the farm work on the weekend? I'll pay you," they'd ask. When I helped, I got paid and was treated to a delicious lunch and dinner. Today, the after-school program is closed, and my wife has to take my mom to the hospital. Can I bring my son here for a little while after school? They would ask. There were times when an employee's elementary school son would study in the office until their parent finished work. There was an abundance of warmth and freedom here. This made me want to work hard and repay these people for their kindness. Honestly, these last 3 years have been the most enjoyable of my life. I worked alongside other craftsmen in a company where only the CEO had a title. During these days, in the 3 years I worked here, the worst news hit us. The company that accounted for 90% of our sales, our biggest client, had gone bankrupt. This news unsettled the usually optimistic employees. If we lose that job, what will happen to our company? The company, sure, but what about us? Our jobs? Our salaries? The employees were talking amongst themselves when the CEO, with a pale face, addressed them. If we lose 90% of our sales, the first thing we need to do is find new clients. That means we'll have to allocate people to sales, which will leave us short-handed. Especially since we rely on skilled manual labor, our work efficiency will drop. To fix that, we'd need to introduce the latest machines for efficiency. But even if we do that, there's no guarantee that we, as sales novices, will be able to secure new jobs. We're stuck in a corner. To acquire new clients, we need a substantial amount of money, and even then, there's no guarantee we'll succeed in getting new customers. The CEO nodded heavily. That's right. Especially if we decide to introduce new equipment, we'll also need to expand the factory. How much money are we talking about? The CEO paused for a moment before answering. $2 million. $2 million. The number was so staggering that all we could do was echo it back. The CEO looked down and sighed. It was as if he had voiced the feelings of every employee. What about a loan from the bank? We'll try, but it's almost certain that no bank will give us a multi-million-dollar loan on the first request. Silence fell over the room. Everyone stared at the floor, speechless. Are we gonna go bankrupt over $2 million? Hearing the CEO mutter those words to himself, I felt a surge of defiance rising within me. Each time the CEO seemed more dejected, my determination not to lose grew stronger. I couldn't bear the thought of losing another place I cherished. Will $2 million be enough by the end of this week? Huh? The employees looked at me in shock and confusion. I quickly formulated a plan in my mind. I'll explain the situation to a private investor named Mr. Anderson, whom I met while working at my previous company. A private investor. Yes. He works at an agricultural machinery manufacturer and invests his personal assets. He's what you might call a part-time investor. The unfamiliar term caused a stir among the employees. I had met Mr. Anderson through work, and after several discussions, we hit it off, and now we've been friends for 10 years. However, I had avoided contacting him after leaving my previous company in disgrace. I had avoided contacting Mr. Anderson for a long time, fearing his disappointment in me. Despite this, he had reached out to me multiple times. But can a private investor really come up with $2 million? That's why we'll ask the bank for a loan of $500,000. While a multi-million-dollar loan might be impossible, it's not uncommon for banks to lend several $100,000 for small business equipment investments. My words made the employees lift their heads in sudden realization. Their eyes now shone with hope. Our strength lies in our ability to produce precision products with millimeter accuracy by hand, something others can't replicate. We can manufacture not only agricultural machinery parts, but also industrial and construction components. We've just been short on manpower and equipment. Let's draft a detailed business plan to convince both the bank and the investor. As I spoke, voices of agreement and determination echoed around the room, with everyone saying things like, "Let's do it, and we can make this work." From that day on, our challenge began. I successfully got in touch with Mr. Anderson, and we scheduled an appointment. The appointment was in 5 days. Every day after work, we gathered to discuss and draft the business plan. Most of the team had never seen or written a business plan before, so the writing fell to me. Despite being relatively new, with only 3 years at the company, everyone helped me gather detailed information about our business. We discussed our target market, past client feedback on our parts, our competitors, and our unique strengths. The CEO and I worked particularly closely to complete the business plan. The day of the appointment arrived quickly. Mr. Anderson had been a valuable contact during my previous job, someone I owed a lot to. We had worked together many times, and he had always supported me. I had left abruptly and hadn't had the chance to properly say goodbye. It's been a while. I apologize for not reaching out in the past 3 years, I said. Good to see you again. I heard from Mike that you left your company suddenly, but I'm glad we can meet again. Since he knew me from the time I worked with Mike, he naturally knew about him as well. After 3 years of no contact, you suddenly ask for an investment. Do you think I can be convinced just like that? I fully understand the audacity, but I have no choice. Please, just hear me out. I've reviewed the business plan you sent. But before we discuss that, you need to explain why you left your previous company and why you are so determined to save your current one. Without that, I won't consider investing a single dollar. Mr. Anderson's request made me pause for a moment. If I handled this poorly, it could lead to defamation. After thinking it over, I decided that now was not the time for caution. I resolved to tell Mr. Anderson the whole truth. I explained how I had been forced to resign for a mistake I didn't make, and how my wife had been unfaithful. I shared how I had been in despair until I found my current job, where I now felt fulfilled. I emphasized that, even putting aside my personal feelings, the company was filled with incredibly skilled craftsmen who deserved better. When I finished, Mr. Anderson sighed deeply. I couldn't tell if his reaction was positive or negative, and my tension grew. I see, that must have been tough. His tone more sympathetic than I expected. I always admired your dedication and sincerity at your previous job. Your communication was always clear and heartfelt. Knowing now that you were set up, I'm really angry on your behalf. Just hearing you say that is more than enough. But even if you're satisfied, I'm not. I've been in contact with Mike since you left, and I even congratulated him on his marriage. I've been betrayed by him. Mr. Anderson's calm voice held a quiet anger, a side of him I had never seen before. So, I want revenge. The weight of his words shocked me. Revenge? Yes. I want you to agree to cooperate with me in this revenge as a condition for my investment in your business. I thought he might be joking, but his serious eyes told me otherwise. I swallowed hard and then nodded. All right. If it's something I can do, I will. I informed the employees that we had secured funding on the condition that we meet certain criteria, without going into the specifics of Mr. Anderson's revenge plan. The employees were unsure whether to be happy about the news, but there was no time for detailed explanations. We all redoubled our efforts, consulting and gathering information. Finally, things started to move forward. On an ordinary weekday, I received a phone call. After work, I checked my smartphone and saw an overwhelming number of missed calls from the same person. Seeing the name displayed, I realized that Mr. Anderson's plan was in motion. I quickly returned the call. Hey, John, what the hell is going on? Mike shouted angrily the moment the call connected. Yes, the caller was Mike. Addressing a senior so informally, especially one much older, isn't impressive. I responded calmly, though I knew my words wouldn't penetrate his anger. Shut up. What's this about a lawsuit for damages now? So, you've received the certified letter. Yes, it's as stated in the document. I'm claiming compensation for infidelity from both of you. Do you have any evidence? Of course. My immediate response made Mike falter for a moment before he regained his bluster. You're bluffing. If you had evidence, you would have already filed the claim. You're panicking because the statute of limitations is running out, aren't you? There's no way you can produce evidence after all this time. It's a different story if the involved party admits to it. What? What are you talking about? I haven't admitted to anything. "Mike, it's not you. It's Emily." "What?" Actually, before Mike contacted me, Emily had called first. Unlike Mike, who was at work, Emily saw the certified letter addressed to her before anyone else, and she called me in a panic. It was almost 3 years since our divorce. The sudden claim for compensation and the amount listed had deeply unsettled her, so she called me. It wasn't meant to be malicious at first. Really, he invited me to dinner once, and then it just continued. "But it's your fault for neglecting me for your work. I was just seeking true love." When I repeated these words to Mike, he was speechless. Learning from my mistake 3 years ago, I made sure to record everything this time. This will serve as solid evidence. As I said this, I heard a thud and distant voices arguing. Mike had probably put the phone down to confront Emily. "I didn't know you recorded it, and you're the one who sent those photos 3 years ago and exposed us," were some of the ugly exchanges I overheard. Realizing the argument would drag on, I ensured I had captured enough on the recording and then hung up. The lawyer I had hired would take care of the rest. Feeling triumphant, I immediately contacted Mr. Anderson to share the recent developments. Thus, as promised, we received funding from both Mr. Anderson and the bank, saving the company. I leveraged my previous sales experience and connections to actively pursue contracts in various fields, securing a diverse range of jobs. The investment in new equipment increased efficiency, and we hired and trained young craftsmen to preserve and pass on manual skills. We significantly expanded our business beyond agricultural machinery, venturing into construction and industrial parts. Thanks to these efforts, our performance not only recovered but surpassed previous levels, continuously growing. The craftsmen adapted flexibly to new types of orders they had never handled before. Some even said, "It's more challenging and enjoyable than before." We also started taking orders for custom-made product parts, increasing our unit prices. However, even a slight drop in precision could severely damage our credibility. Everyone worked with a strong sense of responsibility. Having faced near collapse, our team spirit strengthened, and we became more passionate about our work and training young talent. On a personal note, I successfully received compensation from both Mike and Emily. The recorded phone call was accepted as evidence. Honestly, it was a gamble. It was a plan I couldn't have thought of on my own. Usually, it's nearly impossible to obtain evidence of infidelity so long after a divorce. Mr. Anderson's instincts as an investor were remarkable, turning a bluff into a winning strategy. In case the recorded call didn't provide enough evidence, I had also thoroughly investigated Mike and Emily's infidelity through former colleagues and obtained their testimonies. It was still a significant risk. However, taking risks to achieve success is what an investor does. Mr. Anderson and I have now built a strong relationship, both as business partners and personal friends. I later heard about what happened to Mike and Emily from a former colleague. We had lost touch after I left the company, but one day he reached out to me. "Mike resigned." "What?" I was genuinely surprised by his first words. "You sent the certified letters, right?" After she got hers, Emily completely freaked out. She started confiding in the people who already knew about the affair. Pretty soon, the rumors spread like wildfire. Everyone already thought something was off, so it kind of blew up in her face. "Yeah, I guess people would find it strange to get remarried so quickly after a divorce." I nodded. It was probably then that our colleagues started to suspect something was wrong. However, by that time, I had already left the company and divorced Emily, so everything had already ended for me. Mike tried to keep working to pay off the compensation, but people started saying he might have orchestrated the incident that got you fired. He couldn't take it anymore and resigned. Emily is also working to pay off the compensation, but she's having a hard time since she was a housewife all her life. Mike and Emily, facing huge compensation payments at their age, had aged quickly under the mental stress. Bad deeds always come back to haunt you. Reflecting on this, I caught up with my former colleague and then ended the call. 6 months had passed since we secured the $2 million loan. As the company grew and got busier, I had a slight concern that the close relationships between employees and with the CEO might weaken. However, that wasn't the case at all. We still talked about the weather, shared vegetables, and exchanged updates about our children and grandchildren. Nothing had changed, except that the company had grown and our salaries had increased. When we achieved the goal of securing the $2 million loan, I was celebrated as the key player. However, I remained a novice in many aspects of the business. This didn't change my relationships or make anyone distant. I never realized how happy I could be with things remaining the same. In the corporate world, everyone was hungry for promotion, believing that staying in the same position was a sign of incompetence. But the real world isn't always like that. "Hey, John, we're going out for drinks." Again, if I drink too much, my wife will get mad. "Oh, you've got some nerve, don't you? I'll buy you a drink." Trying to bribe me into silence won't work. Regardless of rank or career, I continue to cherish the important things in my life, enjoying my unchanging days. That was my happiness.